You cannot change what you do not acknowledge. That is a fundamental truth of human psychology, and it is the first wall I hit when I walked into the green room to meet Elena. There is a specific look that people get when they have been running for a long time. Not necessarily physically running, although Elena had done plenty of that, but running emotionally. It is a look of absolute, hollowed out exhaustion. When I looked at her, sitting there on that small sofa backstage, clutching a styrofoam cup of water like it was the only solid object in the universe, I didn't see a woman who was free. I saw a woman who was still in prison, even though the bars were thousands of miles away. The producers had briefed me on the basics, the headline version of the story that brings people to the show. Elena had spent 7 years in a high-control group, a secluded community up in the Pacific Northwest that branded itself as an agrarian utopia but operated like a psychological meat grinder. She had escaped 3 months ago in the middle of the night. That is the narrative the audience expects. They want the drama of the escape, the adrenaline, the hero overcoming the villain. But I have been doing this for a long time, and I know that the physical act of leaving is the easy part. The hard part, the part that actually matters, is deprogramming the brain. It is extracting the poison that has been drip-fed into your psyche for nearly a decade. I sat down across from her before the cameras were even rolling because I needed to get a read on her baseline. She wouldn't make eye contact. She was vibrating with anxiety, her knees bouncing, her fingers picking at the cuticle of her thumb until it bled. I told her, "Look at me." I said it gently, but I said it with authority because she needed to know that there was a structure here, a safety net. When she finally looked up, I saw the terror. It wasn't fear of the cult leader she had left behind. It was fear of me. It was fear of the truth. I knew right then in the silence of that room that she was withholding. There was a secret sitting right there between us, heavy and suffocating. The title of this episode was about her escape, about her bravery. But I knew we weren't going to get anywhere until we dealt with the shame she was carrying. You don't shake like that just because you're a victim. You shake like that when you think you're an accomplice. We walked out onto the stage, and the audience applause washed over her, but she flinched like she had been struck. I watched her body language as she took her seat. She crossed her legs, crossed her arms, hunched her shoulders forward. In my business, we call that protecting the midline. She was guarding her vital organs, instinctively curling into a fetal position while sitting upright. It is a biological response to a perceived threat. I started the interview slowly, wanting to build a rapport, wanting to give her a chance to breathe before we started doing the heavy lifting. I asked her simply how she was feeling, how it felt to be out in the world again. Her answer was rehearsed. It was a script. She talked about the fresh air and the freedom to choose her own clothes, but her eyes were dead. She was reciting lines she thought I wanted to hear. I stopped her. I leaned in and I told her that I wasn't interested in the press release. I told her that I can spot a rehearsed answer from the parking lot, and we weren't here to waste time. I asked her to tell me about the beginning, not the escape, but the entrance. People don't wake up one morning and decide to join a cult. You don't sign up for abuse. You sign up for something you're missing. You sign up for belonging, for purpose, for love. I needed to understand the deficit in her life that this group, this man they called the architect, had exploited. Elena took a breath, and for the first time, the mask slipped just a fraction. She began to talk about her life before she was 22, fresh out of college, drowning in student debt, and estranged from a family that was, by her description, chaotic and critical. She described a profound sense of loneliness, a feeling that she was invisible in a crowded room. This is the profile. This is the target demographic for every predator who has ever set up shop as a messiah. They look for the wounded birds. They look for the people who are desperate to be told that they are special, that they have a destiny. She met a recruiter at a coffee shop. It sounds cliche because it is. It's a formula because it works. She told me about how this woman didn't talk about religion or commune living at first. She talked about sustainability. She talked about disconnecting from the toxic noise of modern society. Elena said it sounded like peace. I stopped her there and asked her to define that feeling. She said it felt like someone was finally listening to her. That is the hook. It is called love bombing. They flood you with affection, with attention, with validation. They create a dopamine loop in your brain that becomes addictive. As she spoke, I could see her romanticizing it again, just for a second. Even now, after everything, a part of her missed the certainty of it. That is what makes this dynamic so dangerous. Freedom is terrifying because freedom requires responsibility. In the cult, she didn't have to make choices. She didn't have to worry about rent or career paths or relationships. She just had to obey. There is a sedative quality to surrendering your will. And I needed the audience to understand that. I needed them to see that she wasn't stupid. She was seduced. She described the first time she went to the farm. It was beautiful, she said. Everyone was working together. There was singing. There were communal meals. The architect, a man in his 50s with a voice that she described as liquid gold, sat with her for 2 hours that first weekend. He told her things about herself that she had never told anyone. I interrupted to ask how he knew those things. She looked confused. I explained to her and to the audience that this is a cold reading technique. He didn't know her. He knew people. He knew that a 22-year-old girl sitting alone in a coffee shop is looking for validation. He made general statements that felt specific because she wanted them to be true. He told her she had a great potential that was being stifled by the world. Who doesn't want to hear that? But then we got to the turning point. The transition from the honeymoon phase to the isolation phase. Elena described how slowly the outside world was painted, not just as a distraction, but as a threat. Her parents weren't just critical. They were suppressive. Her friends weren't just busy, they were lost souls dragging her down. This is classic us versus them mentality. It is designed to sever the tethers to reality. If you cut the lines of communication, the leader becomes the only source of information, the only source of truth. I watched her face harden as she talked about cutting off her mother. She sent a letter dictated by the architect, telling her family she never wanted to see them again. She cried when she told me this. Not a rehearsed cry, but a real guttural sob. This was the guilt surfacing. This was the first crack in the dam. I asked her what the architect did when she cried back then. She said he told her that her tears were weakness, that her grief was just her ego trying to hold on to the past. He reframed her natural human emotion as a spiritual failing. That is psychological warfare. It is gaslighting on an industrial scale. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. We were getting closer to the core issue. I could feel the tension rising in her. She was telling me the story of what happened to her, but she was carefully navigating around something. Every time she got close to the middle years of her time there, she would skip forward. She would jump from the induction to the escape. I pointed this out. I said, Elena, you are giving me the bookends, but you are leaving out the chapters in the middle. You spent 7 years there. You didn't just farm vegetables and meditate for 7 years. She went pale. The shaking returned. She took a sip of water, and her hand trembled so badly she spilled a little on her blouse. She tried to brush it off, avoiding my gaze. I decided to push just a little. I asked her about the hierarchy. I asked her how one moved up in the organization. Because in groups like this, you don't survive by remaining a passive observer. To survive, you have to become part of the machinery. You have to prove your loyalty. And usually, the price of loyalty is your morality. I asked her, what did you have to do to prove you belonged? The silence that followed was heavy. It sucked the air out of the studio. She looked at the audience, then she looked at the cameras, and finally, she looked at me with eyes that were pleading with me not to ask the question. But I am not here to make people comfortable. I am here to make them real. I held the silence. I let it sit there. I did what I was told, she whispered. That's a passive sentence, I said. That puts the action on someone else. I'm asking what you did. She looked at me like I had just pulled the pin on a grenade and set it on the table between us. The silence in the studio was absolute. You could hear the hum of the stage lights. This is the moment where most people fold. They retreat into the narrative of victimhood because it is safe and, frankly, because it is partially true. Elena was a victim, but victims can be manipulated into becoming instruments of the very abuse they suffer. That is the insidious genius of high control groups. They don't just break you, they weaponize you against yourself. If they can get you to dirty your hands, you will never leave because you believe you are no longer worthy of the outside world. I wanted to survive, she stammered, her voice barely registering on the microphone. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I understand survival, Elena. Survival is a biological imperative, but we are not talking about stealing a loaf of bread because you were starving. We are talking about the price of your elevation. You told me earlier that you moved into the inner circle during your 4th year. You moved from the bunkhouse to the main lodge. You didn't get that promotion by being good at gardening. I watched her eyes dart to the exit sign. She was calculating the distance. I had to ground her. Elena, you are here to heal. You cannot heal what you do not acknowledge. You are carrying a backpack full of rocks, and you are wondering why you can't stand up straight. You have to take the rocks out one by one. Tell me about the Guardian program. I saw the color drain from her face completely. The Guardian program was something my researchers had dug up from deep forums, whispers from other defectors who were too afraid to go on camera. It was the internal policing unit of the cult. It was about accountability, she said, reverting to the cult's terminology. We were helping people stay on the path. Stop, I said firmly. Don't use his words, use yours. What was a guardian? She closed her eyes. Tears leaked out, tracking through the makeup she hadn't wanted to wear. We monitored the others. We wrote reports. If someone was showing signs of wavering, if someone was hoarding food, if someone was talking about their families, and what did you do with that information? I asked. I gave it to the architect. And what happened to those people, Elena? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The audience knew. I knew, but she needed to say it. She needed to hear her own voice articulate the reality of her complicity. This is the escalation phase of the interview. This is where we move from the story of what happened to her to the story of what happened through her. They were punished, she whispered. Sleep deprivation, shunning, hard labor. And you knew this would happen when you turned them in? So for the last 3 years of your time there, you weren't just a prisoner, you were a warden. The audience gasped. I heard it. It was a sharp intake of breath, a shift in the energy of the room. Suddenly, the sympathy was mixed with confusion even judgment. Elena felt it too. She curled tighter into herself. I had to. If I didn't report them and he found out I knew, I would be the one in the hole. You don't understand the pressure. You don't understand what it's like to have your mind taken apart piece by piece until you believe that reporting your friend is an act of love. I am not judging you, Elena, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming softer. I am analyzing the situation. I am telling you that the architect made you a co-conspirator so that you would never forgive yourself. He leveraged your fear to buy your loyalty. That is not your fault. But what you did, that is part of your history now, and we have to deal with it. This was the pivot point. I could see she was on the verge of shutting down completely. I had to bring up the specific incident. The secret she was really hiding. The general admission of being a guardian was bad, but there was something specific, a specific face that haunted her nightmares. Elena, I said, tell me about Maya. She flinched so hard she nearly came out of her chair. Her hand flew to her mouth. No, she moaned, I can't. Please don't make me talk about Maya. Maya was your roommate, I said, consulting my mental notes. She was the one person there you actually loved. She was like a sister to you. My producer spoke to Maya's parents. They haven't seen their daughter in 6 years. They are watching this right now, Elena. They are watching and hoping for a clue. Elena began to sob. It was a raw, ugly sound. It was the sound of a soul breaking. She wanted to leave. Elena choked out between sobs. She had a plan. She had a map. She had money stashed away. I waited. I let the silence stretch. I needed her to walk through the fire. She asked me to come with her, Elena continued, her voice trembling. She begged me. She said he was a fraud. She said we were slaves, but I was. I was so afraid. I thought she was being tested. I thought maybe the architect had sent her to test my loyalty. That happens sometimes. They would test you. So you didn't trust her, I said. I didn't trust anyone. There was no trust. There was only the mission. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. I went to him. I went to his office in the middle of the night. And I told him that Maya was planning to run. And what happened? He woke the whole camp up, she said, staring into the middle distance, seeing a memory that I knew was playing in high definition in her mind. He dragged her out of the bunkhouse. He made us all form a circle around her. He stripped her. He humiliated her. He told everyone that she was a cancer, that she was trying to infect us with her weakness. And what did you do? I stood there, she whispered. I stood in the circle, and when he told us to spit on her, I did. The room was dead silent. You could feel the weight of that confession crushing the air out of the lungs of everyone in the studio. This was the bottom. This was the secret she never planned to say out loud. She had come here to be celebrated as a survivor, and now she sat revealed as a betrayer. Where is Maya now? I asked gently. I don't know, Elena wept. After that night, they took her to the remote cabins, the realignment center. I never saw her again. I escaped 3 months later. I left her behind. I saved myself and I left her behind. She buried her face in her hands. I am a monster. That's why I shake, Dr. Phil. Not because I'm scared of him, I'm scared of me. I'm scared that I belong there. I'm scared that I am exactly what he made me. I sat back. This was the crux of the problem. This was the central problem fully revealed. Her trauma wasn't just what was done to her, it was what she was coerced into doing. It is a concept called moral injury. It is what soldiers suffer from when they are forced to do things that violate their core ethical code. It isn't PTSD, it is a deep spiritual wound to the conscience. She wasn't just suffering from fear, she was suffering from a profound self-loathing that convinced her she didn't deserve to be free. I looked at the audience. They were shocked, yes, but I could see the shift. They weren't angry anymore. They were heartbroken. They were realizing that the line between good and evil isn't a wall, it's a permeable membrane, and under enough pressure, anyone can be pushed through it. Elena, look at me, I commanded. She didn't move. Elena, pick your head up. Slowly, she raised her head. She looked like a child waiting to be struck. You are not a monster, I told her, my voice booming with conviction. You were a hostage, and when you have a gun to your head, literal or psychological, you do not have free will. You are judging your actions in that camp by the standards of the free world. That is an unfair trial. You cannot convict yourself for actions taken under duress. But I did it, she argued, desperate to hold on to her guilt because her guilt felt like the only penance she could offer Maya. It was my mouth, my spit. It was his programming, I corrected. You were a puppet. He pulled the strings. If you want to blame someone, you blame the puppet master, not the wood. But here is the hard truth. And I'm going to tell you this because I respect you enough to be straight with you. You can't change the past. You can't unspit. You can't untell. That happened. And you are going to have to live with that. I let that sink in. I wasn't going to give her a cheap it's okay. It wasn't okay. It was tragic. The question is, I continued, what do you do now? Do you let the architect win by destroying the rest of your life with guilt? Do you let him keep Maya in that cabin and you in a mental prison? Or do you take that guilt, that rage, that sorrow, and do you turn it into fuel? This was the turning point of the confrontation. I needed to move her from passive shame to active redemption. She was stuck in the loop of the past. I needed to drag her into the present. Fuel? She asked, wiping her nose. Fuel, I said. You have something no one else has. You have the map. You know how the Guardian system works. You know the layout of the remote cabins. You know where the bodies are buried metaphorically and maybe literally. You are sitting here crying about Maya, but crying doesn't help Maya. Action helps Maya. I saw a spark in her eyes, just a flicker. It was the first sign of life I had seen since she walked on stage. What do you mean, she asked, her voice hoarse but laced with a new kind of urgency. I mean, you use your knowledge, I said. You go to the authorities. You tell them everything. You expose the architect. You help those families find their children. You dismantle that organization from the inside out. You become the very thing he was afraid of, a whistleblower. You make your guilt useful. I watched her process this. It was like watching a computer reboot. The shame was still there, but it was being overlaid with a new operating system, purpose. But I'm afraid, she stammered. He has people everywhere. He'll come after me. Of course you're afraid, I said. Fear is a rational response to danger, but you can't let fear paralyze you. You use the fear as a compass. You let it guide you to where you need to go, because the thing you're most afraid of is usually the thing you need to do most. I could see she was still hesitant. And what if Maya is already, she couldn't finish the sentence? Then you give her parents closure? I said, my voice firm, you give them the truth. Even if the truth is the worst possible outcome, they deserve to know, and you deserve to stop carrying that secret. Secrets are like cancer, Elena. They eat you from the inside out. The only way to kill a secret is to expose it to the light. I decided to shift tactics slightly. I turned to the audience. How many of you have secrets? I asked. Almost every hand in the studio went up. Secrets about your past, secrets about your relationships, secrets about your mistakes, I continued, secrets that are poisoning your present. This woman is brave enough to lay her secret bare in front of millions of people. She is taking a risk. Are you willing to take one too? Are you willing to forgive her? Are you willing to support her in her journey to find Maya and bring the architect to justice? The audience erupted in applause. It was a wave of support that washed over Elena, visibly buoying her. She looked up, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time, she smiled. It wasn't a big Hollywood smile. It was a small, tentative smile, but it was real. It was the smile of a woman who was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't irredeemable. I don't know where to start, she said. I know people, I said. I have contacts. I will connect you with the right authorities. I will put you in touch with a therapist who specializes in deprogramming cult survivors. We will build a team around you. You won't be alone in this. That was the promise I could make. I couldn't guarantee a happy ending. I couldn't promise that Maya would be found alive, but I could promise that Elena wouldn't have to fight this battle alone. The rest of the interview was about logistics. We talked about the practical steps she needed to take. We talked about witness protection. We talked about the resources available to her. I kept reinforcing the message that she was not alone, that she had a community of support behind her. As we wrapped up the show, I gave her one final piece of advice. Elena, I said, you are going to face a lot of resistance. There will be people who will try to discredit you. There will be people who will try to silence you. There will be people who will try to convince you that you are crazy, that you are making this all up. Don't listen to them. Hold on to your truth, because your truth is your power. And your power is what will set you free. Elena left the stage a different woman than the one who had walked onto it. She was still scared, but she was also determined. She was still carrying the weight of her past, but she was also carrying a glimmer of hope. The cameras stopped rolling, and the audience began to file out, buzzing with energy. People came up to me, thanking me for the show, telling me how much Elena's story had touched them. But I wasn't thinking about the audience. I was thinking about Maya. I went backstage to check on Elena. She was sitting in the green room, talking on the phone. I could hear her side of the conversation. Mom, she said, her voice trembling. It's me, I have a lot to tell you. I smiled. That was a good start. But the story doesn't end there. This is not a fairy tale. This is real life. And in real life, redemption is a process, not an event. Elena's journey was just beginning. In the months that followed, I stayed in touch with Elena. I connected her with the resources I had promised. She started therapy. She met with law enforcement. She started to rebuild her life. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. There were days when she wanted to give up. There were days when the guilt was overwhelming, but she kept going. She kept fighting. And then 6 months later, I got a phone call. It was Elena. We found her, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. Maya? I asked, my heart pounding. Yes, she said. She's alive. I couldn't speak. I was overcome with emotion. She's not doing well, Elena continued. She's been through a lot, but she's alive and she's safe. It turned out that Maya had been held in one of the remote cabins for years, subjected to horrific abuse. But she had survived. She had held on to her sanity. She had never given up hope. Elena went to see her. It was a difficult reunion. There were tears, there were recriminations, There were years of pain to unpack, but they started the process. They started to heal. The architect was arrested, the cult was dismantled, the other victims were rescued, justice was served. But the real victory wasn't the arrest or the rescue. The real victory was Elena's transformation. She had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and turned it into something good. She had used her pain to help others. She had become an advocate for victims of cult abuse. She had found her purpose. And that, my friends, is what true redemption looks like. It's not about erasing the past. It's about using the past to create a better future. It's about taking responsibility for your actions and making amends for your mistakes. It's about finding the strength to forgive yourself and to move forward with your life. Elena's story is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope is always possible. Even when you think you are lost forever, you can find your way back. You can rebuild your life. You can find your purpose. You can be free, but it requires courage, it requires honesty, and it requires a willingness to confront the truth, no matter how painful it may be. Because you cannot change what you do not acknowledge, and you cannot heal what you do not reveal. Now, not every story I hear ends with that kind of clear-cut resolution. Sometimes the damage is too deep, the resistance too strong. Sometimes people are just not ready to change, and that's okay. My job isn't to force anyone to be someone they're not. My job is to hold up a mirror and show them who they truly are, even if they don't like what they see. I remember another case, a seemingly less dramatic one on the surface, but one that highlights the complexities of family dynamics and the insidious nature of manipulation. This was a family of four, a mother, a father, and two adult sons. The mother, Carol, had contacted my show because she was at her wit's end. Her sons, Mark and David, were locked in a perpetual state of conflict, and she believed their father, Richard, was subtly fueling the fire. When I met them backstage, the tension was palpable. Mark, the older son, was a successful businessman, dressed in a sharp suit and radiating an air of quiet confidence. David, the younger son, was an artist, more casually dressed and seemingly more sensitive. Richard, the father, was a charismatic man with a booming voice and a disarming smile. Carol, the mother, seemed worn down, her eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and resignation. The central problem, as Carol described it, was that Mark and David couldn't be in the same room for more than 5 minutes without arguing. These weren't just sibling squabbles. These were deeply entrenched conflicts rooted in years of resentment and competition. Mark felt that David was irresponsible and entitled, relying on their parents' financial support instead of pursuing a real career. David felt that Mark was judgmental and condescending, constantly measuring him against his own success. As I delved into their backstory, a more nuanced picture emerged. Richard, the father, had always been a strong presence in their lives, a man who valued achievement and competition. He had coached their sports teams, pushed them to excel in school, and encouraged them to strive for greatness. On the surface, this seemed like positive parenting, but underneath, there was a subtle current of favoritism. Richard clearly favored Mark, the successful businessman, showering him with praise and admiration while often dismissing David's artistic pursuits as hobbies. Carol, the mother, tried to mediate between her sons, but her efforts were often undermined by Richard's subtle digs and backhanded compliments. She felt trapped between her husband's expectations and her son's needs, unable to break the cycle of conflict. The escalation phase came when Mark and David both became involved in the same business venture. Mark, with his financial acumen, had identified a promising investment opportunity and invited David to contribute his artistic skills to the project. Initially, things went well. Mark handled the business side, while David created the marketing materials and designed the product packaging. But soon, old patterns began to resurface. Mark started to micromanage David's work, criticizing his designs and questioning his creative choices. David, in turn, became defensive and resentful, accusing Mark of trying to control him. The project quickly fell apart, leaving both brothers feeling betrayed and resentful. That's when Carol decided to reach out to my show. She hoped that I could help her sons see the destructive patterns in their relationship and find a way to break free from their father's influence. During the confrontation, I focused on Richard's role in the family dynamics. I pointed out his subtle favoritism, his constant need to compare his sons, and his tendency to undermine Carol's efforts to mediate. Richard initially denied these accusations, but as I presented him with specific examples, he began to crack. He admitted that he had always pushed Mark harder because he saw more potential in him. He claimed that he was just trying to motivate David, but his words clearly revealed a deep-seated bias. I then turned my attention to Mark and David. I challenged them to take responsibility for their own behavior. I pointed out that they were both adults capable of making their own choices and breaking free from their father's influence. I encouraged them to focus on their own strengths and to appreciate each other's unique talents. The outcome of this case was less dramatic than Elena's, but it was still significant. Mark and David didn't suddenly become best friends, but they did start to communicate more openly and honestly. They began to recognize the patterns in their relationship and to challenge their father's manipulative behavior. They started to set boundaries to protect themselves from his subtle digs and backhanded compliments. Carol, the mother, also found her voice. She began to assert herself more in the family dynamics, challenging Richard's favoritism and advocating for her son's needs. She realized that she had been enabling his behavior for years, and she decided to stop. In the end, this family didn't undergo a complete transformation. Richard remained largely unchanged, still clinging to his old patterns of behavior, but Mark, David, and Carol had all grown. They had learned to recognize the dynamics at play, to protect themselves from harm, and to build a healthier relationship with each other. This case illustrates a crucial point. Change is not always about transforming the other person. Sometimes it's about changing yourself. It's about taking responsibility for your own behavior, setting boundaries, and protecting yourself from toxic influences. And that's often the best you can hope for. You can't control other people's behavior, but you can control your own response. You can choose to break free from the patterns of the past and create a better future for yourself. You see, in my line of work, I come across a wide range of human behavior, some inspiring, some disturbing, and some just plain baffling. But one thing remains constant: the human capacity for both great good and great evil. And often, the line between the two is thinner than we think. I've learned over the years that people are rarely motivated by pure malice. More often, they're driven by fear, insecurity, and a desperate need for validation. They may lash out at others, manipulate situations, or make terrible choices. But usually, it's because they're trying to protect themselves or get something they desperately need. This doesn't excuse their behavior, of course. It doesn't mean that their actions are justified, but it does mean that we need to approach them with a certain degree of empathy, even when we strongly disapprove of their choices. I'm not saying we should condone harmful behavior. I'm not saying we should let people get away with hurting others. What I am saying is that we need to understand the underlying motivations to see the humanity in the person, even when their actions are reprehensible, because only then can we truly begin to help them change. And sometimes change isn't possible. Sometimes people are so deeply entrenched in their patterns of behavior that they're simply unwilling or unable to break free. They may resist treatment, deny their problems, or sabotage their own progress. In those cases, the best we can do is to protect ourselves and those around us. We can set boundaries, limit our contact, and seek help from professionals. We can't force someone to change, but we can choose to remove ourselves from their sphere of influence. It's a difficult decision, and it often comes with a great deal of pain and guilt, but sometimes it's the only way to preserve our own sanity and well-being, and that's okay too. It's okay to prioritize your own needs, to protect yourself from harm, and to walk away from toxic relationships. You can't save everyone, and you shouldn't feel obligated to try. Your responsibility is to yourself, to your own health and happiness. And if that means cutting ties with someone who is dragging you down, then that's what you need to do. It's not selfish, it's self-preservation. And there's a big difference between the two. So what have I learned from all these years of talking to people, of delving into their lives, of witnessing their triumphs and tragedies? I've learned that human beings are incredibly resilient. We can survive unimaginable hardships, overcome incredible obstacles, and find meaning even in the face of profound loss. I've learned that connection is essential. We need each other. We need support, validation, and a sense of belonging. Isolation is a killer. I've learned that forgiveness is powerful. It doesn't excuse the past, but it does free us from its grip. It allows us to move forward, to heal, and to create a better future. And I've learned that hope is always possible. Even in the darkest of times, even when things seem hopeless, there is always the possibility of change, of growth, of redemption. You just have to be willing to look for it. You have to be willing to confront the truth, to take responsibility for your actions, and to make a conscious choice to create a better life for yourself. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Because in the end, the only thing that truly matters is how we live our lives, how we treat each other, and what kind of legacy we leave behind. And that's something we all have the power to control.